Okay, so last week we discussed, really, we were taking the concept, the second ikar, the second principle, which is Hashem's unity, the fact that God is oneness, is only one power in the world. And we were bringing it down to something which we say all of the time, which is the Shema, which is a mitzvah to say twice a day. And now hopefully we understand why it's a mitzvah to say the Shema twice a day, because the power of it is that what we're actually saying is we're declaring our understanding and our perspective on life. Because what we said really is that this Yichud Hashem, this unity of Hashem, actually describes the one thing upon which everything else surrounds. Everything else rotates around the one principle which is in the middle. And the first idea that he said about that, the first mashal that we spoke about on page 81, is two individuals where one of them is a plumber, world news doesn't affect him so much. The second is a CEO. To him, the question that is always on his mind is, how is this going to affect my business? What difference will this make to my multinational company? And therefore, that idea of Yichud Hashem, the oneness of Hashem, is that as Jewish people, whatever it is that takes place in the world, when everything else that happens in the world, our question on our mind is, how will this affect, or where does this come from in terms of Hashem's running of the world? We're part of Hashem's company. If you like, that's our business. That's the multinational corporation that we are part of. So whether it's the events that happen in our own individual life, or the events that happen to the people around us, or certainly the events on the news as well, that is the question in our mind. That is Yichud Hashem. That is having Hashem's plan, Hashem's goal for the world in our mind at all times. Then the second thing that we said in our recap on page 82 and 83, we discussed the fact that the race matters more than the race car, which means that if the person is driving the race car, his goal is to finish the race. His goal is to get to the finishing line. And the car is the means to an end. And therefore, if that means that he will damage his car along the way, he may wear the engine out, they may need to replace the tires afterwards, but there's no question that is worthwhile, because the whole goal and the purpose of the race car is that to get them to the end line, to get them to the finishing line, which means that the car is a means to an end rather than an end in and of itself. So similarly, that's the way that we relate to ourselves, to our physical existence on this world. We realize that we're here for a limited amount of time, but the time that we have on this world and the physical possessions that we have, the material wealth that we amass while we're here, all of that is a means to an end. When we get confused and we think that that's the purpose, that's all there is, then again, that's a lacking in that Yichud Hashem, because our world has begun to revolve around myself instead of revolving around Hashem's plan in the world. And that essentially is where I need to be. I need to be in a world with God at the center rather than in a world with myself at the center. There's a book called Being Jewish. I think the author was Shimon Horowitz, and he was one of the very earliest of the Baalei Tshuva. When the sort of Baal Tshuva movement began, it was like, around 1967. He wrote this book in the 70s, before Eish HaTorah even existed. This guy had already written a book after becoming religious. And his book, which is called Being Jewish, it's a very interesting book, actually. It goes through lots of different areas in life, and it compares different perspectives. It compares either non-Jewish or a secular perspective to a Jewish perspective on all different areas. But he says the very first chapter he says the defining factor of everything is what is at the center. What is at the center of my world? As long as I am at the center of my own world, then it will always be egocentric, and it will always be focused on myself and my pleasure, my enjoyment, or my wealth, my materialism. Whereas if God is at the center of my world, I may well have all of those things. I'll have the wealth, and I'll have the friends, and I'll have the excitement and enjoyment in my life. But ultimately, all of that revolves around Hashem's world. All of that, I know that I'm operating within the framework that Hashem wants me to be operating within. That's the idea of Yichud Hashem. That's the idea of the unity, the oneness of Hashem, that everything else that we do is a means to an end. Now, how beautiful is that we say to ourselves twice a day, we're going to take time out of our day. Right now, it's an interesting one as well. When I say twice a day, there's a positive Torah mitzvah to say it in the morning, Shema in the morning, and to say it in the evening. And obviously teaching in a girls' school now, I often get asked the question by the girls, are we also obligated? Do we have to do this one as well, right? Because generally speaking, women don't have to do positive time-bound mitzvahs. They don't have to do positive time-bound mitzvahs. So to say the Shema morning and evening is a positive time-bound mitzvah. However, the Shulchan Aruch says that women do need to say Shema at least once a day because it's so fundamental, so important to who we are as Jewish people, that even though they're not going to be obligated in the technicalities of the mitzvah of doing it twice a day at a specific time, they have to make sure to say that Shema, at least that first line, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, at least that line, they need to make sure that they say once a day at the very least. And again, the reason being because that is what focuses us, that centers us. That says Hashem Echad. We don't realize, but what we're actually saying is that Hashem Echad, Hashem is one. We're saying that everything in the world, everything in my life, everything that I see in the day ahead, my perspective is going to be, it's all part of that oneness. I'm like the CEO of the multinational company, and I will see it in the perspective of how does that affect God's world, because that's what it's all about. And then as we ended off last time, which is the way that the Shema then transitions from that declaration, which is the sort of, the unity, the oneness of God, we transition straight into V'ahavta es Hashem, love God, connect to God. It's a beautiful thing. By the way, you should know the paragraph just before the Shema is also about love as well. That's about God's love for us. So it's a very lovely thing that Hashem's sort of unity and the oneness of purpose, the singularity in our minds, that is accompanied on both sides by God loving us beforehand, and then us loving God and connecting to him in that way, which comes after that declaration. And therefore, we've got context to that declaration. The context is that we have a relationship with him as our loving Father, but the declaration itself is what's so important to making sure that we're on the right page for that entire day ahead. We're now at page 85. Okay, page 85 in the middle. How does this affect my daily life? Right? Which means knowing this knowledge, unity of God, how does this affect my daily life? So he says the following, Mesiras Nefesh, which means ultimately that means giving up of oneself. And Nefesh is a soul, right? So it's giving up. Mesirah is to hand over, to give up of oneself, is not just a way to die, right? That's the ultimate sacrifice. God forbid we should never know that Jews have had to make over the generations is when they've actually given up their lives for this, which means that God is so important. He's at the center of my world, that there are certain things which are so bad, which go against that completely, that I'm even willing to give up my life for those, right? The biggest three sins, murder and immorality and worshipping idols, that Jews have been willing and have unfortunately been called upon to give up their lives for. That's the ultimate sacrifice, but it's not the only thing that it's about. It's also giving up of oneself is also a way to live. The Rambam in Hilchos Mezuzah writes that we affix a mezuzah to the doorpost of our home, so that every time we enter or leave, we will encounter Yichud Hashem, right? By the way, the mezuzah contains the Shema. Mezuzah contains this declaration. So we encounter this every time we walk into our home and we walk out of our home. This, says the Rambam, serves as a constant reminder of Hashem's love for us. The mezuzah provides a wake-up call, shaking a person from the stupor of life's trivialities and spurring him to develop a real sense of purpose. This awareness of Yichud Hashem, I have one God and my one goal is to do his will, keeps a person focused and determined and helps him chart a true and proper course through life. I love the way that Judaism doesn't just leave these ideas as hanging. You know what I mean? There's nothing, you'll never have just a theoretical idea in Judaism which isn't brought down and connected to an action. Rav Brazil spoke last Friday night. He said, he spoke about the Jewish child who goes to a friend's house and sees their Xmas tree. And he starts asking him all the questions. He goes up to the parents and he says, well, tell me which way do you like the candles on the tree? Which way do you hang the little decorations? Is it right to left and left to right? And how tall does the tree have to be? Has it got to be 1 meter or has it got to be half a meter? And where do you have to buy the tree from? And there's all different. Where do you position it? You have to put it by the door or you can put it in the window, where, right? And the parents are like looking at this kid like, what on earth are you talking? But that's what Judaism is, right? We always bring things down to earth into action. We have little reminders. So it's a beautiful thing that in addition to saying the Shema, you've got the mezuzah. The mezuzah on your doorpost is also supposed to, right, that's a little reminder, a little tangible reminder. As I go in, I kiss the mezuzah. I've got a little tangible reminder of Hashem being at the center of my world. And he continues, we each occupy two worlds. One is the realm of home and family, and the other is the big world out there. When I step out of my house, I touch the mezuzah and focus on Yichud Hashem, Hashem's unity, centrality to my life. I remind myself that whatever I encounter and whomever I meet, ultimately, the one thing that matters is not whether I aced my job interview or whether I made a successful sales pitch to prospective clients, but whether I made HaKadosh Baruch Hu proud. Did I make Hashem proud? Ultimately, He is the only one who counts. And when I step back into my house, I touch the mezuzah again and remind myself of Yichud Hashem, the centrality of God in my life, my personal life, my family, my values when no one is watching me. It's all centered around how HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to guide my home. His is the only standard to which I have to aspire. Beautiful way of looking at life, right? When we go out of the home, did I make Hashem proud? Is that what I'm doing when I walk outside of the home? And by the way, it helps. Very often we get very disappointed. The person who doesn't get the job interview then often feels it's the end of the world. That's it, right? It's all over and it can get depressed and that sort of thing. Sometimes we have to sort of, take a step back and say, like, this is a huge world. This is a very, very big world that I live in. And God is like much, much bigger than all of those difficult challenges that I have. And if I made him proud in that interview, I did everything I was supposed to do, and I acted in the correct way and with integrity. Whether they give me the job or not, that's also part of God's plan. I have to sort of be able to take that step back. So the mezuzah reminds me to do that. But then that's not enough, because when we're at home and no one else is around, that's sometimes when it's hardest to keep our mission in mind. It's almost counterintuitive, but very often when we're at home, it's sort of, we're so relaxed and we take things so for granted and we're not on show at all and nobody sees and nobody knows that we can sometimes let our standards slip, whether it's the way that we treat others. Sometimes we can be very polite in the workplace and it's much harder at home to do that. Whether it's the care and attention and love, it's much easier sometimes when we're doing a volunteer job. We're working for an organization, we're volunteering. It's easier to be giving than it is when, your wife asks you to do something at 12 o'clock at night and you're very tired, right? We've all been there. We're all in the same boat. So therefore, what he's saying is the mezuzah reminds us of that singularity of the purpose that we have. I'm the same person outside the home as I am inside the home, same relationship with God. Hashem is still central to everything that I do. And again, it's really that question, am I going to make him proud? Well, I make him proud by the way I act when I go inside my house, just like I do when I go outside my house. Mesiras Nefesh, he continues, comes in many shapes and sizes. Giving up a big contract due to the risk of a violation of the laws of interest. Foregoing the enticing fare, like the food at a family event, when the kashrut is questionable. Even simply getting out of bed on time for shacharis, resisting the urge to hit the snooze button. Each time I put aside something I crave, because deep down I know it's not right. I've given up something for the sake of Hashem, right? Those little actions, those are called living with that Mesiras Nefesh. We're giving up something for the sake of Hashem, living with Hashem at the center of my world. It takes exceptional fortitude and motivation to do this. What fuels the ability to consistently triumph and stay true to our values is Yichud Hashem, living with this awareness of the centrality of Hashem in our lives. Avoid becoming distracted by all the noise of life and stay focused on the core goal. There is only one factor to consider, and that is His will. That completes the second principle, and I know it's a bit shorter tonight, but we're going to end there.